There's a word that this boy will spend his entire life chasing. He'll scream it on rooftops, he'll bleed for it in the dirt, he'll murder for it, betray for it, and in the end, he'll erase most of the living world for it. The word is freedom. And here's the part nobody warns you about. By the time he finally has it, by the time he is freer than any human being has ever been or will ever be again, he won't be smiling. He'll be standing inside a mountain of flesh the size of a god, looking down at the only people he ever loved, and quietly hoping with everything in him that they find a way to kill him before he finishes what he's started. That's not how stories about heroes are supposed to end. But this was never really a story about a hero. It only looked like one for a while. So let me take you back. Before the war that swallowed an entire civilization. Before the betrayals stacked so high you'll lose count. Before the boy with the burning eyes became the single most destructive person in the history of his world. Let me take you back to a kid standing at the bottom of a wall doing the most dangerous thing a person trapped inside a cage can possibly do. He's wondering what's on the other side. His name is Eren Yeager, and by the time you understand him, really understand him, the way he's about to make you understand him, you're going to have to ask yourself a question that the people who loved him spent their whole lives avoiding. What if the monster was right? And what if it didn't matter at all? Exhales sharply. We've got a long way to go before that makes sense. Let's start at the beginning, where every cage feels like the whole world. The walls were the first thing anyone ever taught Eren to love. Imagine them for a second. 50 meters of solid stone, 3 of them, ringed one inside the other like the layers of an onion, and behind them, the last of humanity. Or at least, that's what everyone inside believed. As far as any living person knew, the entire human race had been reduced to the few 100,000 souls huddled behind those walls, because beyond them roamed creatures that existed for no reason anyone could explain, creatures that ate people. Not for food, not out of hunger. They had no stomachs that needed filling, no instinct that drove them. They simply devoured human beings, smiling while they did it, as if the act itself were the only thing they were built for. The Titans. For 100 years the walls had held. 100 years of peace so total that an entire generation grew up thinking the danger was a fairy tale, a story old people told to frighten children. The military that was supposed to fight the Titans had become a joke, fat, lazy garrison soldiers drinking on the wall tops, scouts riding out to die for nothing, and coming back in pieces, if they came back at all. People had stopped looking up at the walls with fear. They'd started looking at them with comfort. But not Eren. Never Eren. Because while everyone else saw protection, this kid saw the bars of a cell. He grew up in Shiganshina, a little district that jutted out from the outermost wall like a tooth, the closest place to the outside world that a human being could legally stand. His father, Grisha, was the town doctor, calm, brilliant, kind in that distant way some men have, where you can feel they're carrying something they'll never tell you about. His mother, Carla, was the warmth of the house, the one who scolded and fed and worried, the one who looked at her son's restless eyes and felt a fear she couldn't name. And his best friend was a small, frail boy named Armin, who got beaten up by bigger kids on a regular basis and who held inside his head the single most dangerous thing in that entire walled-off world. A book. A forbidden book. It described the outside, the real outside, beyond the Titans, beyond the walls. It spoke of a body of water so vast you couldn't see the end of it, salty enough to sting, called the ocean. It described fields of burning water and ground made of ice that stretched forever, and expanses of sand that ran on like a frozen sea. To you and me, that's geography. To 2 boys locked inside a stone box their entire lives, it was a religion. And they made a promise. The kind of promise children make and adults forget, except these 2 never would. One day, they swore they would see it. All of it. They would walk out past the walls and stand at the edge of the ocean and finally be free. Hold on to that promise. Because the universe heard it too, and the universe has a cruel sense of humor. Years from now, these two will reach that ocean. And what Eren says when he finally sees it will break something in him that never grows back. But that's later. For now, he's just a furious little boy who can't understand why nobody else is angry. That was the thing about Eren that people noticed first, before anything else, before the powers and the war and the horror. The boy was angry, not the way kids get angry, the loud, quick storm that passes by dinner. His was deeper, older somehow, a slow burning contempt for the comfort everyone around him had settled into. When the local survey corps, the scouts who rode beyond the walls, returned through the gate after another expedition, dragging the bodies of their friends behind them, the townspeople jeered. They laughed. They called the dead fools for chasing dreams instead of staying safe inside the cage, and Eren stood in that crowd, watching a broken old commander weep over a single severed arm wrapped in a sheet, and something in his chest curled into a fist. These were the people humanity called heroes, and the herd was spitting on them for trying. He decided, right then, somewhere around 10 years old, that he was going to join them. He was going to go beyond the walls. His mother slapped the idea down every time it came up. His father said nothing, just looked at his son with that unreadable expression, as if he were watching a stone roll down a hill that had been rolling for 1,000 years before either of them was born. And maybe he was. Because Eren's father was hiding more than any of them could have imagined. There was a basement in their house, locked, that Grisha forbade anyone to enter. Whatever was down there, he promised he would show Eren one day, when the boy was ready. He even gave him a key, on a chain, to wear around his neck. That key is going to outlive almost everyone in this story. And what it unlocks is going to rewrite everything you think you know about who Eren is, where he came from, and what was done to him before he was old enough to understand. But Grisha is keeping that secret close, for now. Some doors you don't open until the world has already ended. So let's leave the basement locked, the way he left it. And let me tell you about the day Eren became a killer for the first time. He was 9 years old. It started with his father bringing him along on a house call out past the edge of town to check on a family the Yeagers knew. A man, a woman, and their quiet daughter, a girl named Mikasa. Eren had met her before. She was the same age as him, dark-haired, watchful, the kind of kid who didn't say much. Grisha and Carla had been planning to take her in for a while. Her family was struggling. So Eren and his father walked out to that little cabin in the woods, carrying nothing but a doctor's bag and good intentions. They found the door open. The mother on the floor. Cold. Human traffickers. The world inside the walls liked to pretend it was civilized, but cages breed rot, and in the poorer corners, men made money the ugly ways. They'd killed Mikasa's parents and taken the girl to sell, because a child like her, exotic, the last of a bloodline almost wiped out, was worth a fortune. Grisha ran for help. And Eren, 9 years old, no muscle on him, nothing but that fist in his chest where a heart should be, Eren went the other way, toward the men. Think about what kind of child does that. He found the cabin where they were keeping her. He knocked on the door and lied his way inside, playing the lost, frightened little boy, and the moment one of the traffickers turned his back, Eren drove a knife into him. Then another. A 9-year-old, butchering grown men in a one-room shack, hands shaking, voice screaming, because there was a girl tied up in the corner, and to him there was simply no version of the world where he walked away, but there were 3 of them. And after the first 2, The math caught up with him. The last man got Eren by the throat, lifted him off the ground, and started to squeeze the life out of him. And in that moment, choking, dying, Eren looked at the girl in the corner, beaten down, hollowed out, a child who had already decided the world was a place where you get taken and there's nothing you can do. And he said the only word he had left. Fight. If you don't fight, you don't win. So fight. Something woke up in her. We'll learn, much later, that Mikasa carried a bloodline with a buried gift, a strength that switches on under the right kind of pressure, but in the moment, it just looked like a miracle. She grabbed the knife. And she ended it. That was the day Mikasa Ackerman started living for Eren Yeager, and the day Eren started carrying a weight he didn't yet have a name for. He took the scarf from around his own neck, red, worn, warm, and he wrapped it around her shaking shoulders, and he told her it was cold, and she should keep it. She will wear that scarf for the rest of the story. Through every war, through every betrayal, she will be wearing it on the worst day of her life. The day she has to do something to Eren that you cannot imagine yet. And in the very last moment of everything, that scarf is going to mean something so devastating that grown adults watching will not be able to speak. But right now it's just a kind thing a boy did for a frightened girl. They went home. Mikasa joined the family. And for a few short years, the three of them, Eren, Mikasa, and Armin, were just kids in a walled town, dreaming about an ocean they'd never seen. They had no idea they were living in the last good days the world would ever have. Because the year was 845, and on an ordinary afternoon, with the sun out and the market full and the laundry hanging in the breeze, the sky cracked open. I want you to really sit inside this moment, because everything Eren becomes, every monstrous thing, every beautiful thing, is born right here, in the next 60 seconds of his life. A bolt of red lightning split the air just outside the wall, and then, rising above 50 meters of stone that humanity had trusted with its survival for 100 years, came a face. A skinless, grinning face, muscle and sinew exposed to the air, towering over the entire district. A titan, but not like the others. This one was enormous, big enough to look the wall in the eye, and it did something no titan had ever done. It kicked. The outer gate, tons of reinforced stone, the thing that had kept death out for a century, exploded inward like a thrown handful of gravel. And the moment that hole opened, the smaller titans came pouring through, into the streets, into the homes, into the lives of people who had spent generations believing it could never happen here. The colossal titan had returned, and humanity's 100-year dream of safety ended in a single afternoon. Eren and Mikasa were near the edge of the chaos when the rubble started raining down. They ran for home, for Eren's mother, for Carla. And when they got there, what they found is the image that will be burned behind Eren's eyes until the day he dies. The house had collapsed. A support beam had come down across his mother's legs, pinning her to the ground, and she couldn't move. Eren and Mikasa pulled at the wreckage with everything two children had, screaming, sobbing, and it would not budge. And down the street, lumbering closer with every second, came a titan. A grotesque, smiling thing. Carla knew. She knew before they did. She begged them to run. And Eren refused. He kept pulling at the beam, refusing to leave her, until a soldier named Hannes, a garrison man, a friend of the family, a good-natured drunk who'd known Eren since he was small, arrived and made the call that Eren never could have. He scooped both children up, one under each arm, and he carried them away from their mother as she screamed her last words after them. Keep living. Don't leave me. No. Keep living. The words tangled together because she didn't know herself what to ask for. and Eren, hauled away over a soldier's shoulder, kicking and screaming and clawing at the air, watched the smiling Titan reach down, lift his mother out of the rubble, and bite her in half. She was still looking at him when it happened. Exhales sharply. That's it. That's the wound. Everything from here, the rage, the war, the genocide, all of it grows out of a boy watching his mother get eaten alive while he was too small and too weak to do a single thing about it. He didn't just lose her. He lost the lie that the world made sense, that being good kept you safe, that the walls would hold. He learned, at the worst possible age, the most dangerous lesson a person can learn: that the world is cruel, and that he was helpless inside it. He made a vow then, not the kind kids forget. He swore he would kill them. Every Titan. He would drive them out, all of them, until not a single one was left breathing on this earth, and then maybe, the helplessness would stop. There's a horrible irony coming that I have to plant right here, even though it won't bloom for hours. The thing that ate his mother, that smiling Titan, it is not a random monster. It has a name. It has a history. It is, in the most twisted way imaginable, connected to Eren's own family by blood. And the question of whether Eren, the grown Eren, the one who can see things no human should be able to see, somehow allowed this to happen, or worse, caused it, is a question this story will eventually force you to confront. But not yet. For now, he's just an orphan with a vow and a fire where his innocence used to be. Hold the thought, we'll be back for it. We always come back for it. The survivors of Shiganshina fled inward, behind the next wall. Wall rose, a tide of broken people pouring into territory that wasn't built to hold them. And here, the people inside the cage showed their second cruelty of the day. There wasn't enough food. So the government did the math the way governments do, and it sent the refugees, Eren and Mikasa and Armin among them, out to reclaim farmland in dangerous territory, in what everyone quietly understood was a way of thinning the herd. Roughly a fifth of them died in a single year. Convenient. The mouths stopped needing feeding. Eren never forgot the way humanity ate its own when it got hungry. He watched the people he was supposedly trying to save behave like the very monsters he wanted to destroy, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought began to grow that he wouldn't be able to name for years. That maybe the Titans weren't the only thing inside those walls worth being afraid of. But for now, the plan was simple, and it kept him breathing. Get strong, join the military, get into the Survey Corps, the only branch that ever went outside, and kill until there was nothing left to kill. Armin came with him, because Armin would follow Eren into anything. And Mikasa came with him, because the day his mother died, she made herself a single unbreakable promise that she would never ever lose anyone again, especially not him. It's worth pausing on what Mikasa became, because she's the love of this story even when the story refuses to call it that. After Shiganshina, she didn't just protect Eren. She organized her entire existence around him. He was the one warm thing left in a frozen world, the boy who taught her to fight, the one who put the scarf around her neck. Wherever he went, she went. Whatever threatened him, she destroyed. People mistook it for devotion or obsession, and later they'll discover there's a darker biological reason layered underneath it. But strip all that away, and what's left is brutally simple. She loved him. She would always love him. And he would spend the rest of his life being unable to say it back, and then doing something so cruel to her that it looks, on the surface, like the opposite of love. Remember that, when we get to the diner. When we get to the words he says to her. Remember, it was never what it looked like. So the three of them enlisted, along with thousands of other kids, in the 104th Training Corps. And this is where the cast of the rest of Eren's life walks onto the stage, and where I have to tell you something that should make your skin crawl a little. Some of the people he's about to train beside, eat beside, bleed beside, laugh beside for 3 years, some of them already know how his mother died, because some of them were there. Some of these smiling teenage faces belong to the enemy, and they are not pretending to be Eren's friends as part of some short con. They're going to spend years living a lie so complete that they'll start to forget it's a lie, until the day it detonates and takes half the cast down with it. But Eren doesn't know that. He just sees comrades. Let me introduce them to you the way he saw them. Because the gap between what he saw and what was true is the engine of everything that's coming. There was Reiner Braun, big, dependable, the older brother type, the one who'd put a hand on your shoulder and tell you that you've got what it takes. Everybody trusted Reiner. There was Bertholdt, tall and quiet and anxious, Reiner's shadow, a boy who seemed to apologize just for existing. There was Annie Leonhardt, small and blonde and ice cold, a vicious hand-to-hand fighter who kept everyone at arm's length and looked perpetually tired of being alive. Hold those 3 names: Reiner, Bertholdt, Annie. You're going to want to remember exactly how harmless they seemed. And then there were the ones who really were exactly who they appeared to be. Jean, who joined the military hoping for a safe, comfortable posting and got dragged into hell instead, and turned out to be braver than he ever wanted to be. Connie, loyal and dim and good-hearted. Sasha, who would steal a potato during a drill and stuff the whole thing in her mouth. A girl so full of life that her death, years from now, is going to land like a punch to the gut precisely because she never stopped being that girl. Marco, kind and earnest. And a small, sharp blonde calling herself Krista, sweet to a fault, who is hiding a secret about who her father is that's connected to the throne itself. They were just kids. They complained about the food and snuck out after curfew and fell in and out of love with each other and dreamed about which branch they'd join. And in the middle of them was Eren, burning hotter than all of them put together, the boy who already knew exactly what he was for. He wasn't the strongest. That was Mikasa, who topped the class without trying, a prodigy who terrified the instructors. He wasn't the smartest. That was Armin, whose body was weak, but whose mind could read a battlefield like a book. Eren was somewhere in the middle on paper, but he had the one thing none of them could be taught. The thing that would carry him past every person who outclassed him on a scoreboard. He could not be made to quit. Ever. About anything. There's a moment during training that tells you everything. The recruits use a piece of equipment that lets them maneuver through the air on cables and gas. The gear the soldiers use to fight titans, and your whole future depends on whether you can balance in it. Eren couldn't. He'd hang upside down, fall on his head, fail again and again, while the instructors started writing him off as a washout who'd be sent to the farms. And it turned out his gear was just broken. Faulty equipment. The moment he got a working set, he could do it. But here's what mattered. Before anyone knew the gear was broken, before there was any reason to think he could ever pass, Eren kept getting up. He had already decided that he would rather die trying to leave the walls than live safe inside them, and that decision made him impossible to break. That's the seed of who he becomes. Not the powers, not the war, just a boy who, once he decided to move forward, would let the entire world burn before he let himself stop. We're going to watch that exact trait save humanity. And then we're going to watch it end the world. It was always the same trait. 3 years passed inside those walls. The recruits graduated. And on the very first day that Eren Yeager put on the uniform he'd bled for, the very first day, the sky cracked open a second time. The colossal titan appeared again, exactly the way it had 5 years before, In a flash of red lightning towering over the gate of Trost, the district they were stationed in, one kick, and the gate was breached, and the Titans came pouring into the streets, and the kids who'd spent 3 years training on dummies suddenly had to do it for real, with their own gear, against the actual nightmare. It went badly. It went so much worse than badly. The veterans pulled back to defend the inner gate and left the rookies as a rear guard, which is a polite way of saying they left them to die buying time. Squads got wiped out in minutes. Kids Eren had eaten breakfast with that morning were torn apart in the air, screaming, while their friends watched and could do nothing. And in the chaos, Eren did the thing he was always going to do. He saw a comrade about to be eaten, a boy named Thomas, and he charged in to help, and he was too late, and the rage took him, and he went after the Titan that did it without thinking. It bit his leg off. Let that sit. The boy who swore to kill every Titan on Earth on the first real day lost a leg in a single bite and learned again the only lesson the world ever seemed to want to teach him, that he was small, that he was weak, that wanting something with your whole heart does not make the world bend. But he wasn't done. Bleeding out, one leg gone, he managed to crawl alongside Armin, his best friend, the boy he made the ocean promise with, and another Titan came for them. And Eren, with a strength that came from somewhere past reason, threw Armin out of the creature's mouth, shoved him to safety, and in doing it, put himself in the Titan's jaws instead. Armin watched his best friend get swallowed whole. That was supposed to be the end of Eren Yeager. A rookie soldier, eaten on his first day, one of 100 faceless casualties in a battle humanity was losing. Armin lay on that rooftop, broken, watching the gate fall, watching the dream die, and there was nothing left to do but wait to be eaten too. And then something started screaming inside the Titans. A roar that didn't sound like any Titan anyone had ever heard. And a hand burst out of the back of one of them, and then an arm, and then a body, and a new Titan tore its way out of the old one's flesh, 15 meters of muscle, no skin to speak of, eyes burning with something that no mindless Titan ever had. Intelligence, rage, purpose, and it did the unthinkable. It turned on the other Titans. It started ripping them apart with its bare hands, punching, stomping, tearing, an animal in a slaughterhouse, killing the very things that had been killing humanity for 100 years. The soldiers watching didn't understand what they were seeing. A Titan that fought Titans. A weapon that had appeared out of nowhere on the worst day of the war. Inside that Titan, fused into the back of its neck, half asleep, half dreaming, was Eren. He didn't know how. He didn't know what he was. He just knew that he'd been swallowed, and then he'd been somewhere dark and warm. And a voice that sounded like his own dead father had whispered something he couldn't quite hear. And then there was fire in his blood, and the world was small beneath him, and his hands were finally strong enough. The boy who watched his mother get eaten because he was too weak to stop it had become the strongest thing on the battlefield. He just had no idea what it had cost, or what it meant, or who had put it inside him, or that it made him, in the eyes of the law, no longer entirely human. When the Titan body burned away, they found him in the back of its neck, alive, untouched, steaming. And the commanders had to make a decision fast, because they had a chance. A real one. They could use this. They could use him. There was a massive boulder near the breach, and if a Titan strong enough could lift it and carry it to the gate, they could seal the hole and take Trost back. No human could lift it. But a 15-meter Titan with a human soul steering it from inside? So they made the impossible plan, and they put the survival of the district on the shoulders of a confused, terrified teenager who'd been a Titan for all of 10 minutes. And Eren did it. He transformed, he lifted a boulder the size of a building, and he walked it through a city full of monsters trying to eat him, with Mikasa and the others carving the titans off his back. And he sealed the wall. He plugged the hole. He saved them all. It should have made him a hero. Instead, it nearly got him killed by his own side. Because here's the thing about a walled-in society that's been told for 100 years, that the only safe human is a human behind stone. The moment they discovered that one of their own could become the thing they feared most, could turn into a titan, they didn't see a savior. They saw a monster wearing a boy's face. The military police wanted him dissected. The fearful wanted him executed on the spot, before he could turn on them. He'd just saved their lives, and they put him in a cell underground, in chains, and held a tribunal to decide whether he should be cut open or killed. This is one of the quiet tragedies of Eren's whole life, and it keeps repeating. Every single time he does something extraordinary to protect people, they recoil from him. The world keeps teaching him the same poison, that his power frightens the very people it saves, that gratitude has a short shelf life, and fear has none. You can draw a straight, terrible line from this cell all the way to the end of the world, and that line is built out of the moments humanity looked at Eren Yeager and decided he was a thing to be feared rather than a person to be loved. He got a defender, though, in that tribunal, and the defender is one of the most important people in this entire story, so let me bring him in properly. His name is Levi, Captain Levi Ackerman. Yes, the same surname as Mikasa, and that's not a coincidence, though it'll be a while before that matters. Levi is humanity's strongest soldier, a small, expressionless man who has personally killed more titans than anyone alive, who speaks in flat insults and obsessively cleans things and carries grief like a stone in his pocket. He served the Survey Corps, the Scouts, under their commander, a tall, calculating man named Erwin Smith, a leader who would spend any number of lives, including his own, to drag humanity 1 inch closer to the truth. Erwin saw what Eren could be, not a monster, a door, a way out of the cage. So in that tribunal, with the court ready to hand the boy over to be dissected, Erwin and Levi staged a piece of theater. Levi walked over to the chained-up Eren and beat him bloody, right there in the courtroom, kicked out a tooth, the whole show, to prove to the terrified court that this Titan boy could be controlled, that if he ever stepped out of line, there was someone strong enough to put him down. It looked brutal. It was mercy. It was the only way to stop them from killing him. And it worked. They handed Eren to the Survey Corps, to Levi, to Erwin, to the scouts he dreamed of joining since he was a furious little boy at a gate, watching the herd spit on the dead. He'd made it. He was finally going outside. He had no idea that going outside was going to teach him that everything he'd believed about the world was a lie someone had built on purpose. They put Eren in the custody of a special squad, Levi's hand-picked elite, and for a little while, a few weeks really, Eren got something he'd almost forgotten existed. Something close to peace. The squad lived together in an old castle out in the wilds, training, learning to control his power, and these veterans, these legends he'd idolized, turned out to be just people. They teased him. They believed in him. They treated him like a little brother who happened to be the most important weapon in the war. For the first time since his mother died, Eren had a family that wasn't built on grief. I want you to feel how warm this was, because it is about to be taken from him in the cruelest way, and the warmth is the whole point. The Titan power Eren carries doesn't just make him strong, it makes him valuable, and valuable things, in a war, get hunted. Because there was another one, another human who could turn into a Titan, hiding inside the walls, inside the military, wearing a friendly face. It revealed itself during the Survey Corps' next great expedition beyond the walls, A massive, coordinated formation of scouts riding out to try to establish a route to Eren's old home, to that locked basement, where Grisha had promised the answers were hidden. And in the middle of that formation, a titan appeared that was nothing like the mindless ones. Female in shape. Fast. Agile. Intelligent. It didn't eat people, it hunted with purpose, killing scouts methodically, ignoring everything except its goal. And its goal was Eren. It cut through the formation like a blade. It knew their tactics, it knew their signals, it moved like someone who had trained alongside them. Because it had. Whoever was inside that titan was a soldier, one of their own. What followed was a slaughter. The female titan tore Levi's entire elite squad apart, the warm, joking veterans who'd just started to feel like Eren's family, killed one after another in a matter of minutes while they died trying to protect him. Eren watched it happen, or watched the aftermath, the bodies in the grass, and he had to make a choice: trust his comrades and stay in his human body, or transform and fight. He chose to trust them. They died for that trust. And the guilt of it, the second family destroyed in front of him, carved another notch into the boy who was slowly learning that everyone who got close to him paid for it. He'd hesitated to protect the people protecting him, and they'd been slaughtered in the seconds his hesitation cost, and there was no way to ever know whether transforming sooner would have saved them or just killed him too. That uncertainty became one more stone in a bag of stones he'd been collecting since the day his mother died, each one a person he couldn't save, each one heavier than the last, until you start to understand how a man could end up wanting to put the whole bag down by ending the world that kept filling it. They got Eren back. Barely. But now they knew. There was a traitor in the walls. A soldier who could become a titan, who'd infiltrated humanity's defenses, who wanted Eren for reasons no one understood. And Armin, sharp, careful Armin, started doing the math, and the answer he arrived at made him physically sick. Because there was someone in their own graduating class whose fighting style, whose build, whose cold and lonely manner matched the female titan exactly. Her name was Annie, the small blonde girl who kept everyone at arm's length, who'd taught Eren a few hand-to-hand moves, who'd seemed like just another tired teenager trying to survive. So they laid a trap in the middle of the capital district Stohess, and when it sprung, Annie's face did something Eren will never forget. It broke. Just for a second. The mask slipped, and underneath it was terror and grief and the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a horrible secret for years. And then she ran. And then she transformed, and the female titan was tearing through a city full of civilians with Eren as the only thing that could stop her. He transformed too. And the two of them fought through the streets, titan against titan, leveling buildings, while Eren did the thing he was best at. He refused to lose. This was personal now, in a way that went past the war. Annie had killed the people who'd just become his family. She'd lived among them, eaten their food, accepted their kindness, and then murdered them. The betrayal lit something in Eren that the mindless titans never could, because the mindless ones were just animals, but Annie had chosen. He beat her, he pinned her, and just as humanity was about to finally capture a living, conscious enemy and pry the truth out of her, just as they were about to get answers, Annie did something nobody expected. She encased herself in a crystal. A hardened shell, impenetrable, sealing her body inside, locking her own mind away beyond anyone's reach. She would rather become a statue than tell them what she knew. Exhales sharply. And that, right there, is one of the most maddening things about this stretch of Eren's life. He kept getting close to the truth and watching it slam shut in front of him. The basement, locked. The expedition, butchered. Annie, crystallized. Every door he reached for sealed itself before he could open it. The world was hiding something enormous from him. Something the size of the sky. And the harder he pushed, the more it cost him in blood. But here's what he didn't realize. The biggest betrayal wasn't Annie. Annie was just the first crack. Because two of the people standing right next to him, two of the comrades he trusted with his life, two of the boys he'd graduated with, they were holding a secret so much worse than hers that when it finally came out, it didn't just shock Eren. It rewrote the entire war. It told him who really destroyed his hometown, who really killed his mother, and it was sitting at the dinner table with him the entire time, smiling, asking him to pass the bread. Remember Reiner. Remember Bertholdt, the dependable big brother and the anxious shadow. Their turn is coming, and it is going to hurt. It happened on a wall top of all the ordinary places, in the middle of a crisis when Titans had somehow appeared inside wall rows and the scouts were scrambling to figure out how. Eren and the others were exhausted, scared, regrouping, and Reiner, big, steady, dependable Reiner, the one who'd carried half the squad's morale on his back for 3 years, just said it. Casually, like he was tired of holding it. He told Bertholdt that they should take Eren and go home. Uncomfortable. At first, Eren thought he'd misheard. Go home where? And then Reiner kept talking, in this flat, drained voice, like a man who'd been split into two people for so long he could no longer tell which one was real. He confessed it all. He was the armored Titan. Bertholdt was the colossal Titan. They were the ones who'd kicked open the gate of Shiganshina 5 years ago. They were the ones who'd breached the wall, let the Titans flood in, started the slaughter. They were the reason Eren's mother was dead. I need you to understand the shape of this betrayal, because it's one of the cleverest, most painful things in the whole story. These weren't strangers. These weren't faceless enemies. Reiner and Bertholdt had lived beside Eren, Mikasa, and Armin for 3 years. They'd shared every meal, every drill, every fear. Reiner had genuinely comforted these kids, had genuinely cared about them in the gaps between his missions, because the human heart doesn't switch off just because the man it belongs to is undercover. The horror wasn't that they were monsters pretending to be friends. The horror was that they were both, at once, all the time, and they'd been at war with themselves for so long that Reiner had literally started dissociating, slipping into a soldier personality and a warrior personality, 2 men trapped in one body, neither of them able to bear what they'd done. But Eren didn't see a tragedy. Not yet. He saw the 2 men who'd murdered his mother standing in front of him, calmly admitting it, and then asking him to come with them. The rage that had been the engine of his whole life detonated. He transformed on the spot, and so did they, and the wall top became a battlefield of giants. This is the fight they call the Clash of the Titans, and it is brutal. Because for the first time, Eren is fighting people he knows, people he trained with, and the weight of it is in every blow. He's not punching a mindless animal. He's punching Reiner, who taught him things, who believed in him, who is the reason he's an orphan. And Reiner, even now, is half trying not to kill him, because some broken part of him still thinks of Eren as a kid he was supposed to look after. Eren lost, outmatched, exhausted. He got captured, the exact thing the female Titan had tried to do, the exact thing everyone had been fighting to prevent. Reiner and Bertholdt grabbed him and a girl named Ymir and started carrying them away, back toward the world beyond the walls, the world Eren still knew nothing about. And as Eren came to, bound, helpless, watching the home he'd fought for shrink in the distance, that old familiar feeling came roaring back. Helplessness, the thing he hated more than death itself. And then he discovered something inside himself that changed the entire game. The scouts came after him. Levi, Erwin, the whole desperate cavalry charge pouring out of the wall to take their weapon back, dying by the dozens to do it. And in the chaos, surrounded by mindless titans that Reiner had drawn to the area, Eren did something that should have been impossible. He screamed. Not in words, in something older than words. And every mindless titan in earshot turned, as one, and attacked the armored titan. He'd commanded them. With his voice. With his will. The mindless monsters that had terrorized humanity for a century obeyed him like a king commanding an army. Nobody understood it. Eren least of all. They called it the coordinate, this power he'd accidentally touched, and it was the first hint of a truth so enormous it would eventually swallow the whole story. That Eren Yeager was not just a kid who could turn into a titan. He was carrying something inside him that the entire world, on both sides of the walls, was willing to die to control. Something that could command every titan alive. Something that could, in the right hands, end the human race. They got him back. Bertolt and Reiner escaped. The girl, Ymir, chose to go with them, for reasons of her own that I'll come back to. And Eren returned to the walls more confused than ever, carrying a power he couldn't use on command, haunted by the faces of friends who'd turned out to be killers, no closer to the truth than when he'd started. But the cracks were spreading now. The lie that the walls were the whole world, that the Titans were a natural disaster, that humanity was alone, that lie was coming apart. And the next place it tore open wasn't out in the field, against an enemy. It was inside the walls. It was inside Eren's own bloodline. Because it turned out the question of who Eren really was, where his power came from, and what his father had done to him in the woods on the night the wall fell, all led back to a single family that secretly ruled the entire world from the shadows. And the answers were about to make Eren wish, more than once, that he'd never gone looking at all. It started with a kidnapping, and it ended with Eren learning that his gentle, quiet father had done something monstrous to give him the power he carried. The government inside the walls, the real one, behind the figurehead king, got nervous. There was a Titan boy who could command the mindless hordes, and there was a secret bloodline, the Rhys family, who were the true royalty of the walls, and somebody decided it was time to clean house. Eren and Historia, remember the small blonde girl, Krista, from training? Got snatched and dragged underground into a vast cavern beneath the earth, where the truth started leaking out in pieces. Because Historia wasn't just a sweet girl with a fake name. She was a Rhys, the illegitimate daughter of Rod Rhys, the head of the family that secretly ruled everything. And the Rhys family held the real power in the walls, a power that should have been theirs, that had been passed down their bloodline for 100 years, until the night it was stolen. Stolen by a doctor from Shiganshina by Eren Yeager, by Eren's father. Here's the piece that hollowed Eren out when he learned it. The night Wall Maria fell, while Eren lay broken with grief over his mother, his father took him out into the woods and injected him with something, and Eren turned into a mindless titan, and in that mindless state, he ate his own father alive. He didn't remember it. His mind had buried it so deep, it might as well not have happened. But it had happened. Grisha had let his son devour him, on purpose, to pass on the power he carried. And the power Grisha carried, it turned out, he had taken by murdering the Rhys family, including a young girl named Frida, who'd been like a sister to little Historia. Sit with the layers of that. Eren's power is built on a pile of corpses. His father killed children to obtain it. Then his father made Eren eat him to inherit it. The boy who swore to kill all the monsters to avenge his mother had a monster's harvest sitting inside his own body, and his beloved father was the one who'd planted it there. Every certainty Eren had about who the good guys were, the walls, his family, himself, was rotting from the inside. Rod Reese wanted it back. He had a plan. He would force his daughter Historia to eat Eren and reclaim the stolen power, restoring it to the rightful bloodline, and then the Rice family would use it to put humanity back to sleep. Literally, to rewrite everyone's memories and keep the cage comfortable forever. It's a horrifying plan, and it almost worked. Because Eren, drowning in guilt, learning that his power was theft and murder all the way down, decided he deserved it. He told Historia to eat him. He gave up. This is one of the lowest points of Eren's whole life. And it's a quiet one, easy to miss next to the giant battles. The boy who could never be made to quit. Quit. Not because he was beaten, but because he'd looked at what he was and decided the world would be better with him gone. He sat in chains and told a girl to consume him and waited to disappear. And it was Historia who saved him. Sweet Historia, who'd spent her whole life being told she was worthless, an accident, a girl who should have been someone else. She chose, in that cavern, to stop living the way other people wanted and start living for herself. She refused to eat Eren. She turned on her own father. She declared that she would become queen, a real one, and she punched her way into history. And Eren, watching this girl reject the fate that had been chosen for her, watching her choose, found a reason to fight again. When Rod Reese turned himself into an enormous, abominable titan to take the power by force, Eren did something new. Cornered, desperate, with a barrel of explosives in his hand and no plan, he was struggling to harden his titan body the way the enemy shifters could, and somewhere in the back of his mind, that whispering voice, the one that sounded almost like memory, gave him the words. He smashed his hand against the wall, and his flesh turned to stone. He could harden, he could make armor and weapons, and most importantly, he could plug holes in walls without sacrificing himself. It was a breakthrough that should have felt like a victory, and it did, for a moment. Historia became queen. Rod Reis was destroyed. The corrupt government fell. For the first time, the walls were ruled by someone who actually cared about the people inside them. The good guys, for once, had won something clean. But Eren had learned a truth he could never unlearn. His power was stolen. His father was not the man he thought. And the voice in his head, the fragments of memory that didn't belong to him, they were starting to whisper about a place beyond the walls, about a war Eren had never heard of, about people who hated him and everyone like him for reasons he couldn't yet grasp. The hardening, though, that was the key to everything. Because now, finally, Eren could do the one thing humanity had dreamed of for 100 years. He could go back to Shiganshina, to his old home, to the basement his father had locked, the basement that held every answer. He could seal the broken wall behind them with his hardening and reclaim the land that had been lost on the day his mother died. So they went. The whole Survey Corps, everyone left, riding back toward the place where it all began. And what waited for them there was the bloodiest battle the scouts had ever fought. The death of the man who led them, an impossible choice between two friends, and, at the very end, behind a locked door in a ruined house, the truth about the entire world. Almost nobody who rode out to Shiganshina was going to ride back, and the ones who did would never be able to see the world the same way again. Neither will you. The Battle of Shiganshina is where Eren's story stops being a war between humans and monsters and starts being something far worse, a war between humans who have been tricked into thinking the other side is monsters. But the scouts didn't know that yet. They just knew the enemy was waiting for them in the ruins of Eren's hometown, and that this was the day they'd been bleeding toward for years. Reiner was there. Bertholdt was there. And a new player, hidden up on the wall, an enormous, ape-like titan with terrifying intelligence, a titan that could throw boulders with the accuracy of an artillery battery. A titan whose human pilot was clearly the mind running this whole enemy operation. The Beast Titan. Eren didn't know it yet, but the man inside that ape was about to become the most important person in the rest of his life. In ways he could never have predicted, because of a connection neither of them suspected. The battle was a nightmare from the start. The Beast Titan rained stones down on the scouts from the top of the wall, slaughtering them by the dozens, a massacre with no way to fight back. The cavalry that had survived 100 missions died in minutes, torn out of their saddles by rocks the size of carriages. And Erwin, the commander who'd spent his whole life chasing the truth in that basement, who'd sacrificed thousands to get here, looked at the situation and understood there was only one move left. A suicide charge. He would gather every surviving scout, mount up, and ride directly into the Beast Titan's barrage as a distraction, knowing that all of them would die, so that Levi could slip through the chaos and kill the man inside the ape. They would trade dozens of lives, including Erwin's own, for one shot at the enemy commander. And he gave a speech before that charge that I won't repeat word for word, but the heart of it was this. He told a field of doomed teenagers that their deaths would have meaning, that the dead who'd gone before them were watching, that this was how humanity moved forward, on a road paved with the bodies of those willing to walk into the dark first. And then he led them into the stones, and he died, and almost all of them died with him, screaming, brave, gone. It worked. The distraction held just long enough. Levi cut his way to the wall and brutalized the Beast Titan's pilot, though the pilot escaped, badly wounded, carried off by a comrade. The enemy commander lived. But the price had been the entire Survey Corps, nearly to the last soldier. Eren, fighting Reiner's armored titan in the streets below, finally managed to harden his fists and beat the armor that had broken him before, neutralizing Reiner. And Bertholdt, anxious, apologetic Bertholdt, transformed into the colossal titan one last time, the same monster that had kicked open the gate and started the death of Eren's mother, and he set the whole district on fire trying to burn the scouts alive. And here is where the story breaks your heart on purpose, because it makes you choose, the same way it made Levi choose. Two people Eren loved lay dying. Armin, his oldest friend, the boy he made the ocean promise with, the brilliant mind who'd carried them through every battle. Armin had thrown himself into the path of the colossal titan to buy time, and he'd been burned so badly there was barely anything left of him. And Commander Erwin lay broken and unconscious nearby, the genius leader humanity desperately needed, the only man who could see the whole board. They had exactly one dose of the serum that could turn a dying person into a titan shifter and bring them back. One, they could save Armin, the friend, the dreamer. Or they could save Erwin, the commander, the strategist who might be the only person capable of leading what was left of humanity to victory. Uncomfortable. Eren screamed for Armin. Mikasa nearly drew her blade on her own captain. And Levi, who loved Erwin like a brother, who had promised to follow that man to the end, stood there holding the syringe with both their lives in his hands, and he made a decision that haunted him for the rest of his days. He let Erwin die. He saved Armin. He decided that Erwin had earned his rest, and that the kids deserved a future more than the war deserved its general. So Armin lived. But the cost was that Bertholdt, the boy who'd trained beside them, the anxious shadow who'd just incinerated half their friends, was fed to the dying Armin, consumed so that Armin could inherit the colossal titan's power. The friend became the weapon by eating the enemy who used to be a friend. There are no clean hands left by the end of this battle. Everyone is carrying someone else's death inside them now, literally and otherwise. Exhales sharply, and then, finally, after everything, after the field of corpses and the impossible choices, the basement. Eren took the key his father had given him, the key he'd worn around his neck since he was a child, the key that had outlived nearly everyone, and he opened the locked door. There were no monsters down there, no weapons, no army. There were 3 books, his father's journals, and what they contained didn't just answer Eren's questions. It detonated the entire foundation of everything he'd believed since birth. Are you ready? Because this is the moment the whole story turns inside out. Humanity had not been wiped out. The walls did not hold the last of the human race. Beyond the ocean, beyond the Titans, there was a whole world full of cities, nations, technology, millions upon millions of people living ordinary lives who had known about the island behind the walls the entire time. The people inside the walls were not the survivors of an apocalypse. They were prisoners, exiles. A single ethnic group called Eldians, also called the subjects of Ymir, penned up on an island called Paradis, while the rest of the world went on without them. And the Titans? The mindless monsters that ate Eren's mother, that humanity had fought for 100 years? They were Eldians too. They were people. Human beings who had been injected with a serum and transformed into mindless giants, then shipped to the island to wander as a living wall. Every Titan Eren had ever killed, every monster he'd sworn vengeance against, had once been a person, with a name and a family, and a life that someone had stolen. Take a breath. Because it gets worse for Eren, personally. His father, Grisha, was not from the island. Grisha came from the outside world, from a nation called Marley, where the Eldians who hadn't been exiled lived as a despised underclass, herded into ghettos, forced to wear armbands to mark them, blamed for every evil in history, used as living weapons in Marley's wars, and discarded when their 9-year terms ran out, because that was the lifespan of one who inherited a Titan's power. 13 years. No more. A curse. Grisha had a sister, when he was young, named Faye. She slipped out of the ghetto one day, against the rules, and Marleyan soldiers fed her to their dogs and laughed about it. That was the world Grisha came from. That horror turned him into a freedom fighter, a member of the Eldia Restorationists, dreaming of an old empire, fighting a hopeless war against an empire that hated him. He had a first wife, a woman of royal Eldian blood named Dina, and a son with her, a son named Zeke. Hold that name. Zeke. Eren has a brother, a half-brother out in the world that he never knew existed. And Zeke is the man inside the Beast Titan that just slaughtered the Survey Corps. The blood connection neither of them suspected. We'll get there. The Restoration movement was betrayed and crushed. Grisha was captured and sentenced to be turned into a mindless Titan and thrown onto Paradis Island, the same fate as so many others. But at the last moment, a mysterious agent, a man called the Owl who'd been spying for the Eldians from inside Marley, saved him instead. The Owl gave Grisha a power, the Attack Titan, and a mission, and a final, desperate hope. The Owl's real name was Eren Kruger. Eren Yeager was named after him. The man who set this whole chain in motion gave Grisha a charge before he died, to take this power to the island, to infiltrate the royal family, to one day reclaim the founding Titan and save the Eldian people. And Kruger said one more thing, almost like a prophecy, almost like a memory of a future that hadn't happened yet. He told Grisha he had to love someone, he had to have a family. Because without something to protect, no one could carry the weight of what came next. And then Kruger said a name. He talked about Grisha's wife and children as if he already knew them, as if he'd seen them. He even said the name Mikasa, Armin, names that meant nothing to Grisha, who hadn't met Karla yet, hadn't fathered Eren yet, hadn't fled to the island yet. How did a dying man in another country, years before Eren was born, know the names of Eren's future friends? That question is the thread that, when you finally pull it, unravels the deepest and most terrifying truth about who Eren Yeager is. But it's buried so deep that even Eren, reading his father's journals in that basement, didn't understand what he was looking at. Not yet. He just knew the world was infinitely larger and crueler and stranger than he'd ever imagined, that his enemies were human, that his people were hated, and that everything he'd suffered was a single small wound inside a wound 1,000 years old. He'd wanted the truth his entire life. He finally had it. And it didn't set him free. It put him inside a much, much bigger cage. There's a quiet scene after all of it, after the basement, after they'd reclaimed Wall Maria and pieced together the truth, that I have to slow down for. Because it's the hinge the entire second half of Eren's life turns on. It's small. There are no titans in it. Just a handful of survivors walking down to the edge of their island for the first time in their lives. The ocean. The thing Eren and Armin had dreamed about since they were small boys hiding a forbidden book. The vast salt water that ran on past the end of sight. They'd promised each other, in a walled town that no longer existed, that one day they'd stand here. And now, they did. Armin was crying with joy, running into the surf, holding up a shell, marveling that everything in the book was real, the water, the salt, the impossible blue size of it all. For Armin, the dream had come true. For Armin, this was freedom. And Eren stood at the edge of the water and looked out across it, and he didn't smile. He picked up a handful of seawater, let it run through his fingers, and he asked a question that should have been the happiest of his life, and instead came out like a death sentence. He said that on the other side of this ocean, across all that beautiful blue, were the enemies. The people who hated them. The ones who'd turned his people into monsters and penned them up like animals. And he asked, with this terrible flatness in his voice, whether killing all of them, every last one over there, would finally make them free. Armin didn't have an answer. Nobody did. Because the boy who'd spent his whole life believing that the Titans were the cage, that the walls were the cage, that if he could just break through, just get outside, he'd finally taste freedom, that boy had finally broken through. He'd reached the outside. And he'd discovered there was no outside. There was just a bigger wall, made of millions of people who wanted him dead. And an ocean was not a door, it was a moat. Freedom kept moving. Every time Eren reached the place where it was supposed to be, it had already left, and there was another enemy standing where it used to be. And something in him, standing on that beach, made a decision that he wouldn't speak aloud for years. A decision that would cost the world almost everything. If freedom was always going to be on the other side of an enemy, then he would simply kill every enemy there ever was. All of them. The whole world, if that's what it took. Because the alternative was to live in a cage forever, and Eren Yeager would rather burn the entire earth than spend one more day knowing the bars were still there. He didn't tell anyone. He smiled, eventually, for Armin's sake. He pretended the dream had been worth it. But the boy who walked away from that ocean was not the same boy who'd walked down to it. Something had gone quiet in him. Something had decided. And the next time we see him, really see him, 4 years will have passed, and he'll be standing on enemy soil, in disguise, hollow-eyed and bearded and limping on a leg he let himself lose, watching a child play, planning the single most destructive opening move in the history of the war. The friends who loved him won't recognize the man he's become. And honestly, neither will you. 4 years. That's the gap. And I think it's worth pausing on what a person does in 4 years of silence. Because the Eren who walks out of that gap is the most important version of him, and the story deliberately hides the transformation from us. We don't get to watch it happen. We don't see the nights he must have lain awake doing the math on the end of the world. We don't see the moment he decided that the few he loved were worth more than the billions he'd never meet. We don't see him learning to lie to Mikasa's face, to smile at Armin, to perform the boy he used to be while becoming something none of them would recognize. The story skips it on purpose so that when we finally find him again, bearded, crippled, calm, sitting in an enemy hospital befriending a child he's planning to make complicit in genocide, the gap between who he was and who he's become hits like cold water. We have to fill in those 4 years ourselves, and the filling in is horrifying because every version of it is a slow, lonely surrender to a decision that should have been impossible to make. That's the genius of how his story is told, and the cruelty of it. We love the boy. We're given the man, and the bridge between them is left dark, so that we feel the loss the way his friends felt it. Suddenly, totally, with no chance to talk him out of it. When the story finally picks Eren back up, it doesn't show him to us right away. It shows us the enemy first, Marley, the nation across the sea, the empire that hated his people. It shows us their child soldiers, Eldian kids in the ghetto training to inherit Titan powers and die young for a country that despised them, fighting Marley's wars, dreaming of becoming honorary citizens who'd still never really be free. It shows us Reiner, home at last, a hollowed-out shell of the boy who'd betrayed Eren, drowning in guilt and trauma, raising the next generation of soldiers to do what he'd done. And it shows us a sweet, brave little boy named Falco, who's befriended a wounded soldier in a hospital bed, a quiet, kind, injured Eldian veteran with a beard and a missing leg and gentle eyes. That wounded soldier is Eren. He'd crossed the ocean. He'd infiltrated the very heart of the empire that wanted his people dead. He'd lived among them for who knows how long, gathering information, learning their language, their politics, their plans, all while pretending to be a broken man who'd lost everything in Marley's wars. And he'd done something to himself in the process that nobody back home authorized. He'd let his own leg get crippled, sat in that hospital, befriended an enemy child, all to get close to the moment he'd been planning since he stood on that beach. The Eren who limps through these scenes is unrecognizable. The fire is still in there, but it's gone cold and patient and surgical. The boy who used to scream and charge and lose his temper now sits perfectly still, listening, calculating, waiting. He talks to Falco gently. He almost seems sad, and there's a conversation between them where Eren says something that should have warned everyone what was coming. He tells the boy that he understands him completely, that they're the same, that Falco is only the way he is because of where he was born, and that Eren was born this way too, that he keeps moving forward because he doesn't know how to do anything else, even though he can see exactly where it leads. He could see where it led. That's the thing nobody understood yet. Eren had inherited the Attack Titan, and the Attack Titan had a secret that none of the others did. Its holders could perceive the memories of those who would carry it in the future. Eren could see forward. He'd been to the end. He knew what he was going to do, and he knew what it would cost, and he was doing it anyway, walking toward it like a man following a path he'd already memorized in the dark. Imagine that loneliness. Imagine knowing the whole shape of the catastrophe you're about to cause, seeing it laid out in front of you like a map, and not being able to stop walking, partly because you don't want to, and partly because some part of you suspects you never had a choice at all. Eren spent these 4 years carrying that alone, smiling at an enemy child in a hospital, while back home his friends still thought of him as the hot-headed boy who'd cried at the ocean. And then Marley made a mistake. They held a festival, a public gathering, with a speech by the head of the family that secretly controlled Marley's most powerful Titan, a man named Willy Tybur, who stood before a crowd of thousands and the assembled military leaders of the world to make a grand declaration. He was going to tell the world the true history, cast the island of Paradis as the great enemy of mankind, and rally every nation on Earth into a war to wipe Eren's people out completely. Eren was in the crowd, under the stage, listening. And the moment Willy Tybur finished telling the world that Paradis must be destroyed, Eren transformed. I want to be honest about what happens next, because this is the scene where a lot of people stopped being able to call Eren a hero, and they were right to. He erupted out of the ground as the attack titan in the middle of a packed civilian festival. The first thing his transformation did was crush Willy Tybur and the dignitaries on the stage. But it didn't stop there. The blast, the debris, the chaos, it killed ordinary people. Families, children. The friends and neighbors of the boy Falco, who Eren had spent months befriending. Eren stood up out of the rubble of a civilian celebration he'd just turned into a graveyard, and he didn't flinch. Uncomfortable. He went after the Tybur family's titan, the Warhammer, a uniquely powerful shifter, and he tore it apart in the streets while the city burned around him. He'd brought the war to the enemy's doorstep, exactly the way the colossal titan had once brought it to his. He had become, with grim and total precision, the very thing that destroyed his hometown and killed his mother, the smiling monster rising over a peaceful town to start a slaughter. Except this time, the monster had a plan, and a face, and a name, and the name was Eren. His old comrades arrived to back him up. Mikasa, Armin, the Survey Corps, now a hardened military force led by survivors. They won the Battle of Liberio. They struck a devastating blow against Marley. But the cost was a thing nobody on the team could quite look at directly, because they just helped slaughter civilians, because the line between them and the enemy had gotten so thin you could see through it. Sasha, bright, hungry, alive Sasha, who stole potatoes and laughed too loud, got shot dead during the retreat by a child seeking revenge for the family Eren's people had just killed. The cycle, biting its own tail. Violence breeding violence, exactly the way it always had, all the way back to the beginning of the world. And Eren just kept moving forward. There's a conversation after that I have to give you, because it's the clearest window we ever get into the man Eren became. He sat across from Reiner, captured Reiner, the broken man who'd murdered his mother, the betrayer he'd hated more than anyone, and instead of rage, Eren felt something almost like kinship. He told Reiner to stop apologizing, to stop drowning in guilt. He said that he understood now, that Reiner hadn't been a monster. Reiner had just been a kid who'd been handed a horror and told it was his duty, who'd done terrible things because of where and when he was born, who couldn't stop walking the path even though it was killing him. And then Eren said it. The thing that recontextualizes his entire character. He looked at the man who killed his mother, and he said, "We're the same," not as an accusation, as a confession. Eren was no longer the boy avenging his mother against the monsters. Eren had become a monster avenging his people, and he knew it, and he'd made peace with it, and there was no version of Forward that didn't end in horror, and he was going to walk to the end anyway. The hero and the villain had collapsed into the same person. And the worst part, the part that's coming, the part that turns this from a war story into a tragedy on a scale almost no story has ever attempted, is that Eren wasn't done. Liberio was the opening move. He had something far larger planned, something that would make the slaughter of a single festival look like mercy, and to do it, he was going to have to betray not just his enemies, but every single person who had ever loved him. He was going to start with the brother he'd never met. And he was going to end with the girl in the red scarf. There's something I have to make you feel before we go any further. Because the back half of Eren's story doesn't land right unless you understand how alone he'd become. And how the people who loved him watched it happen in real time, helpless to stop it. The friends who'd grown up with him started to lose him slowly, then all at once. They kept reaching for the boy they remembered, the hothead who wore his heart on the outside, who shouted before he thought, who'd cry over a wounded comrade and charge a titan twice his size out of pure feeling. And every time they reached for him, their hands closed on someone colder. He stopped explaining himself. He stopped arguing. He'd just look at them with this flat, faraway calm, like a man listening to music no one else could hear, and they'd realize they had no idea what he was thinking anymore. The most expressive person any of them had ever known had become a locked door, and the worst part was that he'd done it on purpose. Because what was behind the door would have terrified them, and because telling them would have meant they might try to stop him. And he couldn't allow that. Imagine being Armin, watching your oldest friend, the boy you made the ocean promise with, slip further away from you every single day, knowing in your gut that he was planning something monstrous, and being unable to do a thing about it because you still loved him, because some part of you still hoped you were wrong. Imagine being Mikasa, having organized your entire soul around protecting one person, and watching that person turn into something you might one day have to protect the world from. They grieved him while he was still alive. That's a particular kind of pain, mourning someone who's standing right in front of you, who eats at your table, who used to be the warmest thing in your life and is now a stranger wearing his face. And Eren let them grieve. He'd decided that their pain, like Mikasa's broken heart, was a price. He was spending the people who loved him the way Erwin had once spent soldiers, coldly, deliberately, for a goal he believed justified it. He'd become the thing he both admired and feared most in Erwin, a man willing to sacrifice anyone, including himself, including the ones closest to him, for a future he could see, and they couldn't. The boy who'd hated how humanity ate its own when it got hungry had grown into a man feeding his own friends' hearts into the furnace, one by one, and calling it love. So keep all of that in your chest as we go into the end. The loneliness of him. The way he isolated himself on purpose, brick by brick, because the most powerful person in the world had decided that no one could be allowed to share the weight of what he was about to do. He carried it alone because he thought that was mercy. He was wrong about that, the way he was wrong about almost everything except the depth of his own love. But he carried it alone all the same, all the way to the end. When Eren came home to Paradis, the island didn't welcome him as a hero. It locked him up. The military leadership, the people who'd survived the long war, who were trying to navigate a world that wanted them dead, looked at what Eren had done in Liberio, at the civilians he'd killed, at the way he'd acted without orders, and they put him in a cell, his own side. Again. The pattern of his entire life, repeating one final time. Every time Eren wielded his power, the people he was trying to protect recoiled and caged him. But this time, Eren wanted to be caged. Because the cell was useful. Because everything was a step now. Because the boy who used to act on raw fury had become a man playing a game so many moves deep that not even his closest friends could see the board. He had a brother to talk to. Zeke, the Beast Titan. The man who'd slaughtered Erwin's charge. They'd discovered the blood connection by now, that Grisha's first son and his last son were on opposite sides of the same war, and that together they held a terrible key. Because Zeke carried royal blood, the blood of the Founding Titan's bloodline, and Eren held the Founding Titan's power, but that power was sealed, useless, unless a holder of royal blood made contact with it. Apart, they were each only half a weapon. Together, they could unlock the single most powerful force in the world. And Zeke had a plan for it. A quiet, sorrowful, monstrous plan. Zeke looked at the Eldian people, cursed, hated, used as weapons, trapped in a cycle of suffering that stretched back 2,000 years, and he decided that the kindest thing, the only merciful thing, was to make sure no more of them were ever born. He wanted to use the Founding Titan's power to sterilize every Eldian alive. No more children. No more Titans. No more suffering. The slow, painless, total extinction of his own people, out of love. Let the curse die with the living. Let it end gently. It's a horrifying plan, and the most disturbing thing about it is that Zeke believed it was compassion, and you can almost follow the logic to a place where you understand him. He'd seen too much. He thought existence itself was the wound. And he needed Eren to make it happen. So Eren agreed. He let Zeke believe they were partners, two brothers united by their father's legacy, working toward the merciful end of their people's pain. They orchestrated an escape, a meeting, a contact between royal blood and the founding power. And around Eren, something dangerous had been growing. A faction, soldiers and civilians who'd come to see Eren not as a weapon, but as a savior, a messiah, the only one strong enough to guarantee the island's survival. They called themselves the Yeagerists. They worshipped him. And they were ready to seize control of the entire government in his name. Eren let it all happen. He let himself be used, let himself be worshipped, let the pieces slide into place, because every single one of them was a step toward the thing he'd decided on years ago, standing at the edge of an ocean, watching freedom run away from him one more time. But before the end, before the point of no return, there was one more thing Eren had to do. And it's the cruelest thing in the entire story. And it's cruel precisely because of how much love is buried underneath it. He had to deal with Mikasa. You remember Mikasa. The girl he saved. The girl he gave the scarf to. The girl who organized her whole existence around keeping him alive. Who'd followed him into every nightmare without hesitation. Who loved him with a totality that frightened people. Eren knew something about Mikasa that she didn't fully know herself. That the Ackerman bloodline carried an instinct. A near biological compulsion to protect a specific host. And that part of her devotion to him might be that instinct, rather than her own free choice. And Eren, planning what he was planning, knowing he was about to become the most hated person on Earth, knowing he was walking toward his own death, made a decision about her that looks, from the outside, like pure cruelty. He told her she'd never been free. He told her that her feelings for him were a slave's instinct, not a choice. And when she, devastated, confused, tried to reach him, he said the thing that broke her. He told her he'd always hated her. He spat it at her like venom, this boy she'd loved her whole life, in a quiet room, and he watched it land. And he didn't take it back. He was lying. We'll learn, much later, that almost every word was a lie, that he said it to free her, to make her hate him, to give her permission to live a long life and let him go and not throw herself into the fire after him the way she always had. He wanted her to survive him, and the only way he knew to make her stop loving a man who was about to become a monster was to convince her the love had never been real. But she didn't know that, so she carried those words like a knife in her chest for the rest of the story. And Eren let her, because he'd decided that her pain now was a price worth paying for her life later. That's who he'd become. A man who would break the heart of the person who loved him most, on purpose, as an act of love so twisted you have to turn it over 3 times before you can see the tenderness underneath the brutality. And then the game ended. And the move he'd been building toward for years finally came. Eren and Zeke made contact. Royal blood touched the founding power. And Eren walked into a place beyond the physical world, a place where all the suffering of 2,000 years had been waiting for him to make the choice that would either end his people gently, the way Zeke wanted, or end almost everyone else, the way Eren had decided on a beach a lifetime ago. His brother thought they were about to save the world by letting it quietly fade. Eren had other plans. He always had. And to understand the choice he made next, you have to meet the girl at the bottom of everything. The first one. The one who started all of it 2,000 years ago. The most tragic person in a story made entirely of tragedy. Her name was Ymir. 2,000 years ago, there was a slave girl. She belonged to a tribe, and the tribe belonged to a king. And one day, a pig went missing, and they blamed her, and they cut out her tongue and hunted her for sport, releasing her into the woods to be chased down. She ran. She hid inside the hollow of an enormous tree, and in that tree, at the bottom of a great pit, she touched something. A strange, ancient source of life, a spine-like creature in the dark water, and it merged with her, and it made her something the world had never seen. The first Titan. The origin of every power Eren and his enemies had been fighting over for the entire story. It all came from this one terrified, mutilated girl, hiding in a tree, who hadn't asked for any of it. Her name was Ymir. And here is the part that breaks you. With this godlike power, the power to flatten armies, to build, to rule, Ymir didn't free herself. She went back to the king, the same king who'd enslaved her, who'd cut out her tongue, who'd hunted her. She used her power to build his empire, to win his wars, to make him a god king, because she loved him. Or because she'd been so thoroughly broken that love and obedience and fear had melted into the same thing, and she no longer knew the difference. He took her as a wife. She bore him 3 daughters, and when an enemy threw a spear at the king during a battle, Ymir, without thinking, threw herself in front of it and died for the man who had destroyed her. Even then, it didn't end. The king ordered his 3 daughters to devour their own mother's corpse so that the Titan power would stay in the family, in the royal bloodline, passed down through the generations. And Ymir's soul, her consciousness, the part of her that should have finally been free in death, it didn't go anywhere. It got trapped. For 2,000 years, in a place between worlds called the Paths, a vast endless field of sand, Ymir kept building Titans, kept obeying, kept serving the descendants of the man who'd enslaved her, because she'd never learned that she was allowed to stop. 2,000 years of slavery that continued long after her body had turned to dust, the most powerful being in the world, and she could not free herself, because no one had ever shown her that freedom was even an option. And into that place, into the paths, into the endless sand, into the presence of the broken little girl who'd been waiting 20 centuries for someone, walked Eren Yeager. The boy whose entire life had been a single word, screamed over and over. Freedom. This is the moment everything in the story had been quietly pointing toward. Zeke, holding royal blood, expected to take command of the founding power and execute his merciful extinction. He reached for Ymir, the way every royal had reached for her for 2,000 years, expecting her to obey, because she always obeyed. But Eren did something no one had ever done. He didn't command her. He looked at this little girl, this slave, this god, and he asked her what she wanted. He told her she wasn't a god, and she wasn't a devil. She was just a person. She'd been waiting 2,000 years, he realized, not for a master, but for someone to set her free. Or maybe for someone who shared her rage, her grief, her refusal to forgive a world that had done this to her. He offered her a choice. And he offered her a hand. Why did Ymir choose Eren over Zeke? Why, after 2,000 years of obedient mercy, did she side with the boy who wanted to destroy almost everything instead of the man who wanted to end the suffering gently? The story leaves it as the deepest mystery in its heart, but here's the reading that lands hardest. Ymir had spent 2,000 years being told to be good, to obey, to sacrifice herself, to suffer quietly for the sake of others. And maybe, after all that time, what she wanted, what the broken, voiceless slave girl at the bottom of everything truly wanted, was for someone, finally, to be angry on her behalf. To refuse. To burn it all down rather than accept one more day of the cage. Eren was the rage she'd never been allowed to feel. So, she took his hand. And the Founding Titan woke up. Eren betrayed his brother in that instant. Zeke's merciful extinction died on the sand. Instead, Eren reached out through the power of every Eldian connected by blood, and he reached down into the walls themselves, the walls of his childhood, the walls that had been his cage, the walls he'd hated his whole life, and he woke up what was sleeping inside them. Because those walls were not stone. They never had been. They were made of millions of colossal titans, packed shoulder to shoulder, hardened into the shape of a fortress, sleeping for 100 years. An army the size of a mountain range. The deadliest weapon ever assembled in the history of the world. And Eren set them loose. They call it the rumbling. The hardened crust of the walls cracked away, and millions of colossal titans, each one 50 meters tall, glowing with heat enough to incinerate everything in their path, stepped out of the cliffs of Paradis and began to walk. Toward the sea. Toward the world. Toward Marley, and every other nation, and every city, and every village, and every man, woman, and child who lived beyond the ocean. Eren's plan was not to defend the island. It was not even to win the war. It was to march this unstoppable army of giants across the entire surface of the earth and trample every living thing outside the walls into paste. To flatten the world. To erase humanity. All of it. Every nation. Every culture. Billions of people. So that his island, his people, the handful he loved, would finally be free of every enemy that had ever existed, because there would be no one left alive to be their enemy. The boy who watched a titan crush his mother had become a wall of millions of titans, crushing the mothers of the entire world. And Eren himself emerged at the head of it, his founding titan a thing of nightmare, a colossal skeleton, a vast spinal centipede of bone with his small human face fused at the base of its skull, riding a tide of his own creation across the sea. The most powerful, most monstrous, most free being the world had ever produced. Nobody could stop him. No army on earth. No weapon. No nation. They tried, the moment the Titans reached the mainland, and the Titans walked over their militaries like they were grass. Tens of millions died in the first days. By the time it was over, roughly 80% of all the human beings on Earth outside the walls would be gone. Cities Eren had never seen. People who'd never heard his name. Children playing in the streets of countries that had nothing to do with his mother or his island or his pain. All of it ground into the dirt by the marching feet of his rage. And the most haunting thing of all? Some part of Eren had seen this coming his whole life. He'd glimpsed it through the Attack Titan's window into the future, this exact catastrophe, this exact march. He'd known where the path led since before he crossed the ocean, since before the basement, maybe since the beach. He'd been walking toward the end of the world with his eyes open the entire time, telling himself he was free, doing the only thing he knew how to do, moving forward, even as it became impossible to tell whether he was the author of this horror or just an actor reading lines he'd already watched himself perform. Free or fated? Choosing or trapped? Eren never fully answered that question, and I'm not sure he could have, and that uncertainty is the wound at the very center of him. But the people who loved him, the ones still alive, scattered, horrified, grieving. They didn't care about the philosophy. They cared that their friend, their brother, the boy from Shiganshina, was killing the world. And impossibly, against everything, they decided to stop him. Even if it meant they had to kill him to do it. The people who finally stood against Eren were not an army. They were a handful of the unlikeliest allies the war could have produced. His old comrades, Mikasa, Armin, Jean, Connie, Levi, and, impossibly, his old enemies, Reiner, who'd murdered his mother, Annie, who'd murdered his squad, Piek, a Marleyan soldier. The very people Eren had spent the whole story fighting, now united with the people he'd spent the whole story protecting, against him. The war had finally produced the one thing 2,000 years of hatred never could. It had made enemies join hands. There's something almost beautiful about that, buried in all the horror. Eren wanted to unite his people by giving them a common enemy in the rest of the world. Instead, he accidentally united the whole world, what was left of it, by becoming the common enemy himself. The thing he could never achieve through love, he achieved through terror. They came together to stop the boy who wanted them safe, and in doing it, they finally became the thing he claimed he wanted them to be. The irony is so total it stops being funny and starts being unbearable. They called themselves the Alliance, and they chased the rumbling across the sea on a flying boat, knowing they were almost certainly going to die, knowing they were the only thing standing between Eren and the total extinction of human life outside the walls. And along the way, the cost kept climbing. Hange, brilliant, manic, kind Hange, who'd taken command after Erwin, who loved the Titans as much as they feared them, Hange held off a horde of the marching giants alone, on foot, buying the others a few minutes with their life, dying in fire so the people they loved could keep going. One more name on the pile. One more friend turned to ash on the road Eren paved. And the question hanging over all of them, the unbearable question, was whether the Eren they were chasing was even still in there. Was there anything left of the boy from Shiganshina inside that skeleton of bone and rage? Or had he become exactly what he looked like? A force of nature, a god of slaughter, an idea that had eaten the person? Armin needed to know. Mikasa needed to know. Because if there was nothing left to save, then killing him was just war. But if their friend was still in there, somewhere, drowning, then they weren't just stopping a monster. They were about to murder someone they loved. The answer came in the strangest place. In the paths, that timeless space between worlds, Armin's consciousness met Eren's, and they sat together, two boys, in a quiet field that looked nothing like the apocalypse raging in the real world. And there, finally, with no audience, with the masks all burned away, Eren told his oldest friend the truth. And the truth was so small and so human, and so devastating, that it recolors everything you've watched. Eren cried. The world ender, the god of the rumbling, the man who'd just killed the better part of humanity, he sat in that field and cried like the boy he'd never stopped being underneath it all. He told Armin he didn't fully understand himself. He told him that part of why he'd done it was the dream, the stupid childhood dream of seeing the world be empty and open and free, the world from Armin's book, except with no one in it to put up another wall. He admitted he'd wanted to flatten everything, that there was a hunger in him for it that he couldn't justify and couldn't explain, that he was, in his own words, an idiot. A born idiot who could never do anything except keep moving forward. And then he said the thing that should have absolved him and instead damns him more, because it reveals just how tangled his love and his cruelty had become. He told Armin that he'd done it for them. For his friends. He'd seen the future. He knew that if humanity outside the walls survived, they would never, ever stop hunting Paradis, that his friends would live short, frightened lives and die young in a war that never ended. So he'd taken the slaughter onto himself. He would be the villain. He would carry the genocide on his own back, do the unforgivable thing, become the most hated man in history, and then he would let his friends kill him. He would arrange it so that the Alliance, his comrades, his enemies turned family, would be the heroes who stopped the monster and saved what remained of the world. They would be celebrated. They would be free. They would live long lives in a world that owed them everything. And the price would be Eren's soul, and his life, and his name forever stained as the worst person who ever lived. He'd planned his own death and his own damnation as a gift to the people he loved. He'd decided to be remembered as a monster so that they could be remembered as heroes. That's how far it went. That's how broken and how loving he was, all at once, impossible to separate. And then, God, and then, he talked about Mikasa. He asked Armin to look after her. And Armin, gentle as ever, pointed out the contradiction at the center of everything Eren had done to her, that he'd told her he hated her, that he'd tried to set her free, that he'd pushed her away. So why did he care now who she ended up with? And Eren, the man who'd flattened the world, broke down completely over the smallest possible thing. He didn't want her to forget him. He'd told her to be free of him. He'd lied and said he hated her so she could move on and live. And yet the thought of her actually doing it, of her finding someone else, of her not thinking about him, was the one thing in the entire apocalypse that he couldn't bear. He wanted her to be free. And he wanted her to never let him go. And he knew those two wishes couldn't both come true, and it tore him apart. This colossal monster weeping over a girl and a scarf, wishing she'd remember him for 10 years and then move on, and hating himself for being too selfish to wish for less. That's Eren Yeager. That's the whole of him, right there. A being with the power to erase humanity, undone by the thought of one woman not missing him. The most powerful person who ever lived, and the only thing he truly couldn't have was the simple, ordinary life where he got to grow old beside the people he loved. He'd traded it away, move by move, for an idea of freedom that he couldn't even define, and at the very end he understood that he'd never been free at all, that he'd been a slave to his own nature, to the future he'd seen, to the dream, to the love, the same way Ymir had been a slave to a king for 2,000 years. He let Armin go. He let the Alliance come. He even, in his own twisted way, made sure they could win, because he wanted to lose. He needed to lose. He'd built the entire endgame so that the people he loved would be the ones to put him down, and the person who would do it, the person Fate and Eren himself had been steering toward this exact moment since a little girl was rescued from a cabin in the woods and given a red scarf, was Mikasa. The final battle was chaos and fire and grief, fought on and around the marching skeleton of the founding Titan as it strode across a ruined continent. The Alliance threw everything they had at it. They died, and they didn't die. And they bled, and they kept climbing, all of them, toward the small human body fused at the base of that monstrous spine, the body that was the real Eren, the boy who'd started all of this with a vow at a broken gate. And it came down, in the end, to the two of them. The way maybe, it always had to. Eren's Titan was wounded, exposed, his human form revealed in the wreckage, and Mikasa flew toward him through the smoke. Mikasa, who had loved him since she was a child, who'd worn his scarf through every horror, who carried the words, "I've always hated you," like a blade lodged in her ribs, who had every reason in the world to hesitate. And she did not hesitate. She understood, finally, what no one else could do, what only she could do, what Eren had been quietly begging the universe to let her do. She had to be the one to end it. Because she loved him. Because love, real love, the kind that 2,000 years of slavery had never taught Ymir, sometimes means letting go of the very thing you would die to keep. She cut his head from his body. The girl in the red scarf killed the boy who gave it to her. And then she gathered his severed head into her arms, and she pressed her lips to his. One kiss, the only one they ever had. A goodbye to a love that never got to be a life. "Thank you," she told him, "for wrapping that scarf around me." The words from the woods, all those years ago, returned at the very end, completing a circle that had been drawing itself the entire time. And in the space between worlds, the little slave girl was watching. Ymir had waited 2,000 years. She'd built titans and served kings and obeyed and obeyed and obeyed, because she'd loved a man who destroyed her and never learned how to stop. And what she'd been waiting for, all that time, in the endless sand, it wasn't a master. It was an answer. She'd needed to understand how a person could love someone, truly love them, and still be free. How love didn't have to mean chains. And in Mikasa, in that final impossible act, loving Eren enough to let him go, loving him enough to kill him for the sake of the world, choosing him and releasing him in the same motion, Ymir finally saw it. The thing she could never do for her king, Mikasa did for Eren. She let go. And 2,000 years of slavery ended. Ymir was free. She smiled, the way a person smiles when an unbearable weight finally lifts, and she dissolved, and she was gone, at last, into whatever comes after for a soul that's been held too long. When Ymir went, the power of the Titans went with her. Every Titan on Earth, the marching wall of the rumbling, the giants in the field, every shifter, turned back into a human being in an instant. The curse that had bound Eren's people for 2,000 years simply ended. There would never be another Titan. The thing humanity had feared, fought, and died over for 100 years inside the walls and 2,000 years across the world, it was over, erased. Eren's death and Mikasa's love and Ymir's freedom ended it all in a single moment. Eren did, in the most horrible and roundabout way imaginable, exactly what he'd sworn to do as a furious 9-year-old standing over his dead mother. He drove out every Titan. He freed his people from the curse. He saved the ones he loved. He just had to murder most of the world and orchestrate his own execution and break the heart of the only person who ever truly knew him to do it. The vow was kept. The cost was everything. But before we leave him, I have to take you back to a thread I planted hours ago, at the very beginning, because the story saves its most terrible revelation for the end, and you deserve to feel its full weight. Do you remember the Titan that ate Eren's mother? The smiling one? The one with the strange wrongness to it? It had a name. It was Dina Fritz, Grisha's first wife, Zeke's mother, who'd been turned into a mindless Titan by Marley long before, washed up on the shores of Paradis as part of the living wall. And of all the people on the entire island that mindless Titan could have wandered toward, of all the homes it could have stumbled into, it went directly to the Yeager house, to Carla, to Eren's mother, as if it had been guided there, and it had been. Because Eren, the grown Eren, the one who could reach back through the paths, who held the founding Titan, who could send memories and impulses through the bloodline across time, Eren may have steered that Titan to his own mother, not out of malice, out of necessity, because his mother had to die on that exact day for Eren to become the person he saw himself becoming in his visions. The whole horrible machine of his life needed that wound to start turning. And so, possibly, the man Eren became reached back into the past, and made sure the boy Eren suffered the loss that would create him. He caused the tragedy that defined him. He was the author of his own origin. Think about that. The defining trauma of Eren's life, the thing that lit the fire, the thing that started the vow, the thing this entire story is built on. Eren himself may have orchestrated it, reaching back through time, trapped in a loop where the man causes the boy's pain, so the boy will grow into the man who causes it. Free will and fate collapsed into a single closed circle with no beginning and no escape. He didn't just lose his mother to the cruelty of the world, he delivered her to it himself, to keep the timeline he'd already witnessed. The freest man who ever lived was running on rails he'd laid down with his own hands, and he could see the rails, and he couldn't get off them, and maybe he never even wanted to. That's the deepest horror of Eren Yeager. Not that he became a monster, but that the monster, and the boy, and the loving friend, and the world ender, and the grieving son were all the same person, locked in a loop, and not one of them could ever be sure which one was holding the wheel. After the dust settled, after the marching giants crumbled into steam and bone, after the survivors stood on a quiet hilltop and realized the war was actually, finally over, there was the matter of what to do with what was left of him. Eren's body was gone, scattered, but his head remained, and the Alliance carried it home. They buried him on Paradis, under a single great tree on a hill, and if you've been paying attention, you'll feel the shiver of it. Because it was a tree like the one Ymir had hidden in 2,000 years ago, the place where all of this began. The boy who'd spent his whole life trying to escape the cage was laid to rest in the soil of the island that had been his cage, beneath a tree that was the womb of the curse he'd ended. The circle closed one last time, gently this time, in green grass and quiet wind. Mikasa came to the grave. Of course she did. She came alone, and she sat beside the small mound of earth that held the head of the boy she'd loved her entire life, and she wore the scarf. She thanked him again. She mourned him the way you mourn someone who was both your greatest love and your greatest grief. Someone you would have followed anywhere, someone you had to kill to save the world, someone whose last words to you were a lie meant to set you free. The contradiction of Eren lived on in her. Because how do you grieve a man who broke your heart on purpose so that you'd survive him? How do you forgive the cruelty when you finally understand it was love wearing the worst possible mask? She had to make peace, in the end, with carrying both, the love and the wound, for the rest of a long life. He'd wanted her to remember him for a while and then move on. She would carry him forever. He'd asked for less than he deserved and gotten more than he had any right to. Because that's what love does. It refuses the reasonable terms. The friends survived. Armin, Jean, Connie, Levi, the enemies turned family. They lived, and they negotiated, and they tried to build a fragile peace between Paradis and what remained of the outside world, trading on the fact that they had been the heroes who stopped the rumbling. Eren's terrible gift worked exactly as he'd planned. His friends were celebrated as the saviors of humanity. They had standing now, leverage, a seat at the table, because they'd killed the devil. Eren had made himself the monster so that they could be the heroes who defeated him, and in the cold arithmetic of it, the trade paid out precisely the way he'd designed. But here's the part that refuses to let the story end on comfort. The part that proves Eren was right about something terrible even as he was wrong about everything else. The peace didn't last. It never does. The story shows us, in its final breaths, that years later, long after the heroes had aged, long after the graves had grown over, the cycle of hatred and war ground back into motion. Paradis, despite everything, was eventually consumed by conflict again. The hatred Eren had tried to drown in blood simply regrew, the way it always had, the way it always will. Because the cruelty of the world is not a thing one man can end no matter how many millions he kills. He flattened 80% of humanity to break the cycle, and the cycle barely paused before it started turning again. That's the bleakest truth at the bottom of Eren's whole life. He sacrificed his soul, his name, his friends' hearts, and most of the living world, all to buy a freedom that turned out to be temporary, a peace that turned out to be a pause. The cage he tried to smash was never made of walls or titans or enemies across the sea. It was made of something older: fear, grief, the human instinct to wall ourselves off from each other and call the people on the other side monsters. And that cage doesn't have a gate you can kick down. Bertholdt couldn't kick it open. Neither could Eren, no matter how many million titans he sent marching. And yet, in the very last image of the story, there's a tree on a hill, and it has grown enormous over the years, fed by the earth where Eren was buried. And a small bird flies down and tugs at a scarf around the neck of someone resting beneath it, fussing with it the way you'd adjust a scarf to keep someone warm. The kind of small, tender gesture a boy once made for a frightened girl in the cold woods, a lifetime ago. The story never says it's him. It never says it isn't. It just lets the image sit there, a bird, a scarf, a tree grown from a grave, and it lets you decide whether some echo of Eren lingers in the world he died to free, still doing the only gentle thing he ever really knew how to do, which was to make sure the people he loved didn't get cold.
He wanted to see the world be free. And he saw it. He just had to be there to do it. So now you've lived it.
From a furious little boy at the bottom of a wall to a god of bone marching across a dying world. And the question that's been waiting at the end of this road the entire time, the one I promised you'd have to face, is finally sitting here in front of you. And there's no clean way around it. What do we do with Eren Yeager? Because the easy answer, he was a villain. He committed the worst genocide in his world's history. Condemn him and move on, is true. And it's also a way of refusing to look at him. And Eren spent his whole life being refused a real look by people who found it easier to fear him than to understand him. The walls did it. The tribunal did it. His own government did it. The whole world did it. And if we close the book by just calling him a monster, we do the exact same thing, and we miss the only thing that ever made his story matter, which is that he wasn't a monster. He was a person. A specific, particular, broken, loving person who was handed an impossible world and made the worst possible choices inside it for reasons that were, underneath all the horror, heartbreakingly human. He wanted to be free. That's all. That was the whole engine. From the first page to the last, every single thing Eren did grew out of a child's desperate, animal hatred of being caged. And the tragedy, the real, load-bearing tragedy of his entire existence, is that he never once figured out what freedom actually was. He thought it was on the other side of the wall, and he broke the wall, and it wasn't there. He thought it was across the ocean, and he crossed the ocean, and it wasn't there. He thought it was on the far side of the enemy, so he resolved to kill every enemy in the world, and he very nearly did, and even then, in the smoke and the ash, with 80% of humanity dead at his feet, he still wasn't free, because the thing caging him was never out there. It was the loop, the future he'd seen and couldn't escape, the nature he was born with and couldn't outrun, the grief he was carrying since he was 9 years old that no amount of slaughter could ever set down. He was the freest person who ever lived, and he was a slave the entire time, and the most chilling thing the story ever does is suggest that maybe those two things were never actually different. Maybe total freedom and total imprisonment meet at the same point, where you're so unconstrained that nothing can stop you and so trapped by your own self that you can't choose anything else. Eren got to the place where he could do anything, and when he got there, he discovered he could only do the one thing he'd always been going to do. That's not freedom. That's the most elaborate cage ever built, and he built it himself, with his own hands out of the future, and he locked himself inside it and threw away the key, the same key, maybe, that he'd worn around his neck since he was a boy. And here's what I keep coming back to. The thing that won't let me file him away as simply evil. Underneath all of it, the genocide, the lies, the cruelty to Mikasa, the cold patient years of planning the end of the world, underneath all of it was a person who loved so hard it ruined him. He killed most of humanity, and the reason, when you scrape all the way down to the bottom, was a handful of people. A girl in a red scarf, a best friend with a book about the ocean, a few comrades who'd become a family, his dead mother, whose half-eaten body he never stopped seeing. He looked at a future where those few people would suffer and die in an endless war, and he decided he would rather be the most hated being in history than let that happen. He took the entire weight of the world's evil onto his own back, voluntarily, so that the people he loved could put it down. That's not the math of a hero, and it's not the math of a villain. It's the math of a person who loved badly, enormously, catastrophically, and never learned that love isn't supposed to cost the world. He could have just lived. That's the unbearable thing. At any point, he could have stopped. He could have stayed a boy in a walled town and grown old beside Mikasa and Armin and watched the ocean and complained about the food and died in a bed surrounded by people who loved him. The future memories showed him 100 ways the story could have gone, and some of them were small and ordinary and warm. He saw the version where he was just a man, and he walked past it. Because he was the kind of person who could not stop moving forward, and because some part of him had decided, on a beach a lifetime ago, that an ordinary life inside any cage at all was worse than death, even a death that took most of the world down with him. The people who study his story will argue forever about whether he had a choice, whether the future memories made everything inevitable, or whether seeing the future was just an excuse, a way for a frightened, grieving man to pretend his terrible decisions weren't really his. I don't think the story wants you to settle it. I think it wants you to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. The same discomfort Eren sat in his whole life. The same discomfort that's at the heart of being a person at all. The question of how much of what we do is choice, and how much is just the shape we were pressed into by everything that happened to us before we were old enough to fight back. Eren never resolved it. He cried in a field at the end and admitted he was an idiot, that he didn't fully know why he'd done the worst thing anyone had ever done, only that he had to, only that he kept walking forward, only that he loved his friends and wanted them free and couldn't find a gentler way to give it to them. There's no triumph in that confession. There's no villains gloating and no hero's nobility. There's just a tired, broken young man who'd been carrying the whole world's pain since he was a child, finally setting it down, finally admitting he never understood it any better than the rest of us do. And maybe that's the truest thing about him. Eren Yeager wasn't special because he could turn into a titan, or command the others, or see the future, or end the curse. He was special because he refused, with his entire being, to accept a world that wasn't free, and in refusing it that hard, that completely, he showed us exactly how far that refusal can go when it's fed on enough grief and aimed in the wrong direction. He's a warning. He's a mirror. He's the part of all of us that hates the cage and would do anything to escape it, followed all the way to the end of the road, to the place where the desire for freedom becomes the most terrible prison of all. We started at the bottom of a wall, with a boy wondering what was on the other side. We end on a hill, under a tree, with a scarf, and a bird, and a grave, and a girl who loved him keeping his memory warm in a world he died to free. The boy got his answer about what was on the other side of the wall. It turned out the other side was just more walls, all the way down. Walls made of fear and grief and the cruelty people do to each other when they're scared, and the only way out he could find was to flatten everything and lay himself in the ground beneath a tree on the island he could never truly leave. He wanted to see a world with no walls in it. In the end, the only place without walls was the one he made by leaving. Thank you for walking the whole road with me, all the way from a frightened kid to a fallen god and back to a boy beneath a tree. It's a heavy story to carry and a heavy one to set down. Some lives are too big to hold in a sentence, and the only honest way to understand them is to take the long way through. To follow every wound and every choice and every contradiction all the way to the end, and let the meaning arrive slowly, the way meaning always does. Eren spent his whole life trying to make a long, painful story short to end the suffering in one decisive, world-shattering stroke, and it never worked, because the things that matter don't end fast. They echo. They take the long way. So we'll leave him there, under his tree, free at last in the only way that ever held, not in a single ending, but in the long telling that lets a boy become more than a monster in the memory of the people who keep choosing to understand him. A long road for a short answer. But then, the answers worth keeping were always the ones that took the whole story to reach. Rest easy, Eren. The wall's gone now. You can stop walking.